Racism in the workplace takes many forms, but this shocking incident crossed every line of human decency. A manager's hateful actions against a black woman would soon lead to consequences no one saw coming. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Sunlight streamed through the glass facade of Technova's Chicago headquarters, dancing across the polished marble floors of the lobby. Amara Johnson strode through the revolving doors with the confidence of someone who belonged there, despite not being an employee. Her tailored navy suit and measured steps spoke of purpose and professionalism as she clutched her leather briefcase containing the merger documents that could transform the company's future. The receptionist nodded in recognition as Amara approached the desk. Her name was on the VIP visitor list, after all. What Amara failed to notice was Brad Morgan, the regional manager, watching her from beside the water cooler. His eyes narrowed, jaw clenched tight, fingers wrapped around a cold can of cola. The 42-year-old executive had been with the company for 15 years and considered himself untouchable. "Excuse me," Amara said to the receptionist, her voice clear and measured. "I have a 9:30 appointment with the board." Brad's footsteps were deliberate as he approached, the sound barely registering in the busy morning hustle. Several employees glanced up from their smartphones, sensing the tension in his posture. Robert Davis, a mid-level executive waiting for the elevator, noticed Brad's expression and felt a knot form in his stomach. In one fluid, calculated motion, Brad Morgan tore the tab from his soda can. The sharp click caught Amara's attention, but before she could turn fully, he upended the can over her head. The dark, sticky liquid cascaded down her braided hair, splashing across her face and shoulders. Time seemed to freeze. The constant hum of computers faded away. Phones rang in distant offices, unanswered. The security guard by the entrance took a step forward, then hesitated, unsure how to respond to a senior manager's actions. Amara stood perfectly still as the cold soda soaked through her silk blouse and dripped onto her carefully prepared documents. The merger contracts, representing months of work and $340 million in potential revenue, wilted in her hands, blue ink bleeding across white pages. A crowd formed at a cautious distance. Some employees stared openly while others pretended to look at their devices. Maya Ramirez, the receptionist, sat with her hand covering her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Lisa Carter, a junior analyst passing through the lobby, stopped dead in her tracks, witnessing everything. "Oh, we don't need your kind here," Brad said, his voice low but audible in the unnatural silence. Amara's eyes filled not with tears, but with something far more dangerous, resolve, slowly lifted to meet his. The droplets running down her face did nothing to diminish her dignity as the crowd of employees remained frozen, witnesses to a moment that would soon shatter everything they knew about their workplace. Amara Johnson didn't scream or plead. The cold soda dripping down her neck and soaking her silk blouse might have broken someone else, but her expression hardened into something more dangerous than anger, determination. With deliberate movements, she reached into her designer purse and pulled out her smartphone, her fingers steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "What do you think you're doing?" Brad sneered, his smirk faltering slightly as she began systematically documenting everything. Her drenched clothing, the ruined contract papers scattered across the marble floor, his own contemptuous expression, and the shocked faces of witnesses frozen in the lobby. "Evidence," Amara replied, her voice low but clear enough to carry across the suddenly silent space. She captured image after image, turning slowly to ensure she missed nothing. The sticky liquid continued trailing down her arms as she worked, but she refused to acknowledge the discomfort. From the edge of the growing crowd, Lisa Carter watched the scene unfold with mounting horror. The junior analyst had been heading to a meeting when the commotion caught her attention. Without hesitation, she pulled out her own device and pressed record, capturing video of what was quickly becoming the most shocking display of workplace harassment she'd ever witnessed. "This is insane," whispered someone beside her, but Lisa didn't respond, focusing instead on keeping her footage steady despite her trembling hands. Through her viewfinder, she saw the regional manager's expression shift from smug satisfaction to uncertainty as he realized the consequences of his actions were being preserved for posterity. Several employees backed away, unwilling to be associated with what was happening, while others stood transfixed, unable to look away from the train wreck unfolding before them. "You'll regret this," Brad threatened, taking a step toward Amara, but she merely adjusted her angle to capture his aggressive stance. "I believe you're the one who'll have regrets," she responded calmly, never lowering her phone. Lisa zoomed in on the consultant's face, capturing the dignity there, despite the soda staining her clothes and dripping onto the floor. The young analyst knew instinctively that what she was recording would travel far beyond Technova's glass walls. This wasn't just a workplace incident, but something that would ignite conversations across the country. As security personnel finally began moving toward the scene, Lisa caught Amara's eye. Something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement, woman to woman, before the consultant returned to her methodical documentation, preserving every second of her public humiliation, as if collecting ammunition for a war only she knew was coming. Maya Ramirez's fingers trembled as she scanned the VIP visitor list for the third time. There it was, Amara Johnson, consultant, scheduled for a 2 o'clock meeting with the merger team. The receptionist's stomach tightened as she glanced back at the chaos unfolding in the lobby, where the woman who matched that name stood dripping with soda, dignity intact despite the humiliation. "This can't be happening," Maya whispered to herself, watching as Brad Morgan stood there with an empty can and a smirk that made her blood boil. She had witnessed his casual cruelty before, the dismissive tone he used with junior staff, the way he accidentally mispronounced foreign names, but this was different. This was blatant, public, and aimed at someone connected to the highest levels of Technova. Maya knew the protocol. Document the incident, notify security, wait for HR to handle it. But something in Amara's composed stance, despite the liquid seeping through her expensive blouse, told Maya this moment required more. With a deep breath that did little to steady her racing heart, she reached for her desk phone and dialed a number few employees dared to call directly. "Mr. Johnson's office," answered the executive assistant on the other end. "This is Maya from reception," she said, her voice quavering. "There's an emergency in the lobby. Brad Morgan just poured his drink over a visitor, Amara Johnson. She's on the VIP list, and I think—" She lowered her voice, eyes darting to ensure Brad couldn't hear. "I think she might be related to the CEO." On the 14th floor, Alan Johnson was midway through explaining quarterly projections to the board when his assistant slipped in and whispered urgently in his ear. The CEO's expression transformed from professional detachment to shock, then to cold fury in the span of 3 seconds. "Excuse me," he said, rising abruptly from his chair. The 7 board members exchanged confused glances as their normally composed CEO abandoned his presentation without explanation. Alan strode toward the private elevator, his mind racing. 6 years of marriage to Amara had taught him that she was more than capable of handling herself. But the thought of her being disrespected in his own building made his jaw clench until it ached. The merger she had come to discuss represented months of her careful work that could transform Technova's future. As the elevator descended, Alan straightened his tie and steadied his breathing, Whatever had happened in that lobby, he knew one thing for certain. Someone would answer for it. The doors slid open, and the crowd of employees parted like water before him. Their faces a mixture of relief and apprehension. His eyes found Amara immediately, standing tall despite the indignity, her gaze meeting his with a silent communication that spoke volumes. Then he turned toward Brad Morgan, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Robert Davis stood frozen at the periphery of the gathering crowd, his tie suddenly feeling too tight around his neck. As a mid-level executive who'd spent 8 years climbing Technova's corporate ladder, he recognized the gravity of what was unfolding before him. Brad Morgan's smirk contrasted sharply with Amara Johnson's dignified composure, despite the soda dripping from her hair onto the pristine marble floor. "Someone should do something," whispered a voice beside him. Robert's stomach knotted as he weighed his options. Intervening meant potentially crossing Brad, a man known for his long memory and vindictive nature. The regional manager had tanked careers for far less than public humiliation. Robert glanced at Amara, noting how she maintained her poise even as the dark liquid stained her expensive blouse. He'd seen her twice before in the building, always professional, always commanding respect. Now watching her endure this blatant disrespect made his palms sweat and his conscience ache. "Brad, that's enough," he started to say, taking half a step forward before catching the warning glare from his superior. The words died in his throat. Robert retreated, hating himself with each backward step, choosing instead to blend into the background of shocked onlookers. "You'll regret this," Amara stated calmly, her voice carrying across the now silent lobby. It wasn't a threat, but a promise, delivered with such certainty that several employees exchanged nervous glances. She checked her wristwatch, 2:52 in the afternoon. Robert noticed how deliberately she noted the time, as if documenting every detail of this moment. The executive watched as she carefully gathered the soggy contracts from the floor, placing them methodically into a plastic folder from her briefcase. What had been mere paperwork minutes ago was transforming before their eyes into evidence. Robert understood the implications immediately. Those contracts, the ones he knew represented the merger worth hundreds of millions, were now physical proof of what had transpired. Around him, the whispers began. Employees pulled out phones, some texting frantically, others discreetly capturing images. Each shocked face, each hushed conversation was becoming part of something larger than Brad's impulsive cruelty. "He's done," murmured someone nearby, "when Alan finds out." Robert swallowed hard, knowing they were right. The CEO would not take this lightly, especially not when the victim was his own wife. His inaction would be remembered too, he realized with growing dread. In the corporate battlefield that was Technova, Robert Davis had just chosen the wrong side of history, and he knew it. The marble floor of Technova's lobby seemed to vibrate as Alan Johnson descended from the executive elevator. His footsteps echoed through the suddenly silent space, commanding attention without a single word. The crowd of employees parted like water, creating a path straight to the center of the commotion. Some averted their eyes, while others watched with a mix of dread and anticipation. Alan took in the scene with calculated precision. His wife Amara stood before him, her silk blouse clinging to her skin, dark soda dripping from her braids onto ruined paperwork. Despite the humiliation, she maintained a dignified posture, chin raised slightly. Across from her, Brad Morgan stood with his shoulders squared, a defiant smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The regional manager's empty soda can dangled loosely from his fingers, incriminating evidence he seemed almost proud to display. "What the hell is happening in my company?" Alan's voice boomed across the lobby, bouncing off the glass walls and startling several onlookers. The CEO's normally composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the fury beneath. Brad stepped forward, his confidence wavering slightly under his superior's intense gaze. "Sir, I was simply enforcing security protocols. This woman was attempting to access restricted areas without proper—" "This woman," Alan cut him off, "is my wife and a scheduled consultant for today's merger meeting." Brad's face drained of color. He stammered, "I wasn't informed of any—" "I have the visitor log right here, Mr. Johnson," Maya Ramirez interjected, her voice quiet but steady. The receptionist stepped forward, trembling slightly as she handed Alan the leather-bound logbook. "Mrs. Johnson was properly signed in 20 minutes ago. I notified Mr. Morgan's office as per protocol." Alan flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening as he confirmed Maya's statement. The receptionist continued, her voice gaining strength. "I witnessed everything. Mr. Morgan approached Mrs. Johnson unprovoked and deliberately poured his drink over her head." The CEO's eyes darkened as he looked from Maya to Brad, then to the silent crowd of employees who had done nothing to intervene. Only now did some begin to nod in confirmation of Maya's account. "The security footage will corroborate exactly what happened," Amara said calmly, speaking for the first time since her husband's arrival. Her voice carried across the lobby without raising it, commanding attention through composure rather than volume. Brad's defiance crumbled, replaced by the dawning realization of what he had done, and to whom. The regional manager opened his mouth to speak, but Alan had already turned away from him. Gently placing his suit jacket around Amara's shoulders, Alan Johnson's hands trembled with barely controlled rage as he carefully opened the soggy portfolio. The contracts inside, documents that had taken months of negotiation, were now a disaster of bleeding ink and warped paper. Blue rivulets ran across the pages, transforming meticulously crafted legal language into unintelligible smudges. $340 million, he whispered, his voice dangerously quiet. The merger that would have positioned Teknova as an industry leader was literally dissolving before his eyes. Months of work, countless meetings, and delicate negotiations, all potentially destroyed in a single moment of bigotry. The CEO's jaw muscles worked visibly as he processed the magnitude of what Brad Morgan had done. This wasn't just an attack on his wife, it was corporate sabotage that threatened the company's future. The gathered employees shifted uncomfortably, sensing the storm brewing behind their leader's controlled exterior. "The board meeting is suspended indefinitely," Alan announced, his voice cutting through the tense silence of the lobby. His gaze swept across the crowd, noting who looked away and who met his eyes. Robert Davis, always politically savvy, studied his shoes with sudden interest. "Brad," the CEO said, pointing at the regional manager who now looked considerably less confident than he had minutes ago. "Carol," he continued, gesturing to the lobby supervisor who had stood by during the incident, "my office, now." Carol White paled visibly, her hands fidgeting with her employee badge. "Sir, I didn't—" "Now," Alan repeated, brooking no argument. The authority in his tone left no room for discussion. Maya Ramirez stepped forward, still clutching her logbook. "Mr. Johnson, I have the visitor records and security footage access codes if you need them," she offered quietly. "Thank you, Maya. Bring them up in 5 minutes," he replied, his expression softening momentarily before hardening again as he turned back to Brad and Carol. The assembled staff parted like water as Alan strode toward the elevators, the 2 summoned employees following reluctantly behind. The whispers began immediately, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Everyone knew that what happened next would define Teknova's culture for years to come. Amara remained in the lobby, dignity intact despite her soaked clothing. She caught her husband's eye as he entered the elevator, and a silent understanding passed between them. This wasn't just about personal vindication. It was about setting right a system that had allowed such behavior to fester unchallenged. As the elevator doors closed, Lisa Carter quietly slipped her phone back into her pocket, the damning video safely recorded and backed up to the cloud. The evidence was secure, and the reckoning had begun. Lisa Carter's hands trembled as she uploaded the video to her private social media account. "This just happened at Technova Chicago," she typed, adding hashtags, workplace, racism, and SARS corporate accountability before hitting post. Within minutes, her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. "Have you seen Lisa's video?" whispered colleagues across departments, sharing links through company messaging systems. By lunch hour, the footage had escaped the confines of Technova's internal networks and exploded across multiple platforms. The junior analyst watched in stunned silence as the view counter climbed. 500, 3,000, 20,000. By mid-afternoon, major news outlets had picked up the story. Executive assaults consultant in corporate lobby read one headline: "Racial incident at tech giant Sparks outrage," declared another. The hashtag Technova shame began trending nationally, with commenters demanding immediate action. Maya Ramirez received 17 calls at the reception desk from journalists seeking statements. The receptionist, still shaken from the morning's events, forwarded them to the communications department per protocol, though she knew the standard corporate responses wouldn't suffice for this crisis. In their downtown apartment, Amara Johnson sat beside her husband, watching their phones light up with messages of support and outrage. The consultant maintained her composure, methodically documenting each media mention and public reaction. "This isn't just about me anymore," she told Alan, her voice steady despite the day's trauma. "People are sharing their own stories now." Indeed, thousands of users had begun posting their experiences of workplace discrimination under the viral hashtags. Former Technova employees emerged with allegations against Brad Morgan and other executives, creating a damning pattern that stretched back years. By 7 o'clock that evening, news vans lined the street outside Technova headquarters. Reporters stood in the fading light, delivering live updates against the backdrop of the company's illuminated logo. "Sources tell us the board has called an emergency meeting," announced one journalist, her breath visible in the cool Chicago air. Robert Davis watched the coverage from his living room, a knot of regret tightening in his stomach. The mid-level executive had remained silent during the incident, and now his inaction played on repeat for millions to see. His phone pinged with a message from the CEO requesting all management staff report early tomorrow. As darkness fell completely, Technova's PR team worked frantically to draft statements while monitoring the digital firestorm. The company's stock had already dropped 3 points in after-hours trading, and investors were demanding explanations. What had begun as one man's cruel act had transformed in less than 12 hours into a national conversation about corporate culture, accountability, and racial justice, with Technova and Amara Johnson at its center. The morning after the incident, Technova's headquarters buzzed with tension. Alan Johnson arrived at 6 a.m., his face carved with determination. By 7, he had summoned Jerome Williams and the security team to his office, laying out precise instructions for what would follow. At 8:30, Brad Morgan strutted through the lobby, oblivious to the storm awaiting him. The regional manager nodded curtly at Maya, who kept her eyes fixed on her computer screen, her hands slightly trembling as she recalled yesterday's chaos. "Mr. Morgan, the CEO requests your immediate presence," said Jerome, his tall frame blocking Brad's path to the elevators. Upstairs, Alan didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Your employment with Technova is terminated, effective immediately." he announced, sliding a document across his mahogany desk. Brad's face flushed crimson as he stammered about misunderstandings and overreactions. The incident was recorded. Multiple witnesses have provided statements, Alan continued, his voice level but cold. Your behavior violated every principle this company stands for. Security officers appeared at the doorway with an empty box. Brad watched in disbelief as they methodically packed his personal items while he stood frozen, the power he'd wielded just 24 hours earlier evaporating before his eyes. Across the building, Carol White received different news. The lobby supervisor sat rigid in her chair as Human Resources explained her suspension, pending a full investigation into her failure to intervene. I didn't know what to do, Carol whispered, tears welling. He's a regional manager. Everyone has a responsibility, the HR director replied firmly, especially those in supervisory positions. By noon, Alan had approved a public statement drafted by the communications team. It acknowledged the incident without excuses, promised a thorough investigation, and outlined immediate steps toward reform. The company's stock dipped slightly as the statement circulated, but analysts noted the swift response might prevent lasting damage. Inside Technova's walls, however, the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Employees gathered in small clusters, voices low and eyes watchful. Robert Davis avoided the break room entirely, haunted by his own inaction in the lobby. They say Lisa's video has 3 million views now, whispered an IT specialist to her colleague. I heard legal is preparing for a lawsuit, another replied. Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Amara. Thank you for your courage yesterday. The receptionist smiled briefly before returning to her work, aware that her simple act of making that call had altered the trajectory of everything. As the workday ended, rumors swirled about who might be next, which managers had histories of similar behavior, which executives had looked the other way. The trust that had once flowed through Technova's gleaming corridors had fractured, leaving everyone wondering where the breaking points would appear next. 3 days after the incident, Amara Johnson entered the Technova boardroom with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. The tension was palpable as 12 executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She hadn't come to rehash her humiliation, she'd come armed with evidence. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Amara began, her voice steady despite the lingering trauma. She opened her portfolio and distributed meticulously prepared reports to each board member. For the past 18 months, I've been documenting systemic issues at Technova. The projector illuminated with graphs and statistics that told a damning story. Employee retention rates showed people of color leaving at 3 times the rate of their white counterparts. Promotion data revealed qualified minority candidates consistently passed over. His salary comparisons displayed glaring disparities that couldn't be explained by experience or performance. These aren't isolated incidents, the consultant explained, clicking to the next slide showing anonymous testimonials. These are patterns that have been normalized within your corporate culture. Alan Johnson sat frozen at the head of the table, his expression shifting from surprise to dismay as he absorbed the data his wife presented. The CEO had prided himself on building an innovative company, yet somehow had missed the rot spreading beneath the polished surface. "Why didn't you come to me with this sooner?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amara met his gaze directly. "Would you have believed me without proof, or would you have dismissed it as anecdotal, like most of your executives have done when concerns were raised?" Margaret Chen, the CFO, cleared her throat. "These numbers are concerning. But surely there are explanations that don't involve discrimination," Amara finished for her. "I've controlled for every variable: education, experience, performance reviews. The pattern remains consistent." Robert Davis, who had stood silently during the lobby incident, now stared at his hands. The mid-level executive couldn't meet Amara's eyes as she outlined exactly how many qualified candidates had been overlooked during his department's last hiring cycle. As Amara concluded her presentation, silence enveloped the room. Her composure throughout had been more powerful than any emotional appeal could have been. Alan rose slowly, pain etched across his features. "I've failed this company," he admitted. "And I've failed you." He turned to the board members. "We begin implementing changes today. Not next quarter. Not after market research. Today." Amara gathered her materials, her mission accomplished. She hadn't come seeking revenge. She'd come to initiate transformation. As she walked out, she knew the real work was just beginning. Outside Technova's gleaming Chicago headquarters, a crowd of nearly 100 protesters had gathered by 9 in the morning. Their signs bobbed in the crisp air: "Justice for Amara," "End workplace racism," and "Technova, do better." Local news vans lined the street. Cameras trained on the growing demonstration that had begun as a social media movement and transformed into physical action. Lisa Carter found herself thrust into an unexpected spotlight. The junior analyst who had captured Brad Morgan's vicious act was now fielding requests from major networks. She stood nervously before a Channel 7 reporter, her voice growing steadier as she recounted what she'd witnessed. "I just did what anyone should have done," Lisa explained, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "When I saw Mr. Morgan pour that soda over Amara Johnson's head, something inside me just said, 'Record this.' Too many times these incidents happen without proof." Her interview went viral within hours. Employees from across the corporate landscape began sharing their own stories of discrimination using the hashtag #NashTechnova effect. Lisa's inbox flooded with messages from colleagues who had remained silent about similar experiences, thanking her for her courage. Meanwhile, Maya Ramirez expected the worst when human resources requested her presence. The receptionist had broken protocol by calling Alan Johnson directly during the incident. She entered the meeting room with trembling hands, prepared to defend her actions or possibly clear out her desk. "Miss Ramirez," began Diane Foster, the head of HR, "your quick thinking during the crisis demonstrated exactly the kind of initiative we need." Maya blinked in surprise as Diane continued, "We'd like you to join our task force to redesign our discrimination response protocols. Your perspective from the front lines is invaluable." By afternoon, Maya found herself in a conference room with executives who had never before asked for her opinion. She spoke quietly at first, then with growing confidence as she outlined how receptionists could serve as first responders in crisis situations. "We see everything," Maya explained. "We're the first face of the company, but also the first witnesses when things go wrong." Back outside, the protesters had grown to over 200. Among them were former Technova employees who shared stories of being marginalized or pushed out. Their presence created a living testament to the systemic issues that had festered beneath the company's polished surface. As the sun began to set, Lisa joined the crowd after her final interview of the day. She spotted Maya leaving the building and waved her over. The two women, once just colleagues passing in hallways, embraced like old friends united by a moment that had changed everything. The boardroom fell silent as the final vote was tallied. 7 days after the incident that had shaken Technova to its core, Amara Johnson's comprehensive diversity initiative had passed with an overwhelming majority. She sat poised at the end of the table, her calm exterior masking the weeks of preparation that had led to this moment. "Effective immediately," Alan Johnson announced, his voice carrying the weight of his position. "These reforms are non-negotiable company policy." The CEO's gaze swept across the faces of his executive team. I want to be crystal clear. Anyone who fails to implement these changes or undermines this initiative will be terminated. No exceptions, no second chances. The reforms were sweeping. Mandatory hiring quotas ensuring representation at all levels, quarterly independent audits of promotion patterns, and comprehensive anti-bias training that would be required for every employee from the mailroom to the boardroom. Amara had designed the program meticulously, drawing on research and consulting with experts in workplace equity. In the corner, Robert Davis shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. "The shareholders will have concerns," he ventured, his voice barely above a whisper. "These quotas could be seen as reverse discrimination." Several heads nodded in agreement, but before Alan could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the message, and a thin smile crossed his face. "Interesting timing," he said, placing his device on the table. "I've just received word from Westbrook Capital. They're prepared to withdraw their $40 million investment if we don't demonstrate meaningful change." The CEO leaned forward. "It seems our key investors believe diversity isn't just morally right, it's financially essential." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Even the most resistant executives straightened in their seats, suddenly attentive. The stakes had become too high to ignore. Maya Ramirez, newly appointed to attend board meetings as Executive Relations Coordinator, made notes furiously. Her promotion had raised eyebrows, but her quick thinking during the crisis had proven her value beyond question. "Implementation begins tomorrow," Amara stated, distributing folders containing detailed timelines. "I'll be heading the Oversight Committee personally, with quarterly reports directly to the board." As executives filed out, conversations hushed but urgent, Alan approached his wife. "You've changed the company forever," he said quietly. Amara gathered her papers, her wedding ring catching the light. "This is just the beginning," she replied. "The real work starts now." Outside the boardroom windows, Chicago's skyline stretched into the distance, a landscape of corporate towers where similar conversations were long overdue. At Technova, at least, that change had finally arrived. Jerome Williams paced the security office, his new protocols spread across the desk. As head of security at Technova, he felt personally responsible for the incident that had occurred in the lobby. If his team had been better trained, perhaps Brad Morgan's actions could have been prevented. "This is ridiculous," muttered Frank, a security guard who'd been with the company for 15 years. "We're here to protect the building, not babysit executives' feelings." Jerome looked up sharply. What happened to Amara Johnson wasn't about feelings. It was assault, plain and simple, and it happened on our watch. The security team sat in uncomfortable silence as Jerome outlined the new visitor management system. Gone were the days of intimidating bag searches for some, while others walked through unchallenged. Every person, regardless of appearance or position, would receive the same respectful treatment. "From now on, we document everything," Jerome explained, distributing tablets to his team. "Any incident, no matter how small, gets logged. And if you witness discrimination, you report it immediately." Across the building, Amara was meeting with the IT department to launch SafeSpeak, the anonymous reporting system she'd designed. The sleek interface allowed employees to document incidents without fear of retaliation. "The system preserves anonymity while collecting crucial data," she explained to the programmers. "We need to know where the problems are happening, which departments, which managers." Alan Johnson joined the meeting halfway through, standing quietly at the back of the room. He watched his wife with admiration, noting how the IT team hung on her every word, despite her lack of technical background. Her authority came from something deeper than a job title. Within 48 hours of SafeSpeak going live, 27 reports flooded in, Amara and Maya Ramirez, now in her new role as Executive Relations Coordinator, worked late into the night categorizing the complaints. "Look at this pattern," Maya said, pointing to her screen. "The marketing department has 8 reports alone." Amara nodded grimly. "And 5 about Thomas in accounting, the same behaviors Brad displayed, just less publicly." When the executive committee convened the following morning, Alan presented the anonymized data. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "This is what's been happening under our noses," he said firmly, "and it stops now." Robert Davis, who had stood frozen during the lobby incident, raised his hand hesitantly. "How do we know these reports are legitimate? Anyone could make accusations." Amara fixed him with a steady gaze. "The same way we know what happened to me was legitimate, Robert, because when you create a safe space for truth, it comes pouring out." By week's end, 3 managers had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and Teknova began the painful but necessary process of confronting its ugly truths. 1 month after the incident, Teknova's headquarters felt like a different place. The marble lobby that had once witnessed Amara Johnson's humiliation now bustled with new energy as diverse hires moved through the space with purpose. Where tension had once hung in the air like a fog, conversations flowed more freely, punctuated by occasional laughter. Alan Johnson observed these changes from his office window, noting how the company's culture was transforming. The latest internal survey results sat on his desk, showing employee morale up by 28%. Yet the same report indicated a temporary 15% dip in productivity as teams adjusted to new protocols and training sessions. "Growing pains," he muttered to himself, knowing the short-term disruption would yield long-term strength. Downstairs, Maya Ramirez guided a group of new hires through orientation. Her recent promotion to Executive Relations Coordinator had come with a new confidence. She pointed out the safe speak terminals installed throughout the building, explaining how the anonymous reporting system had already identified and addressed 12 instances of workplace discrimination in just 4 weeks. "This isn't just about avoiding incidents," Maya told them. "It's about building a workplace where everyone can thrive." Meanwhile, Amara sat alone in a conference room, her smartphone screen filled with hatred. The comments section of a business journal article about Teknova's transformation contained dozens of vicious attacks directed at her. Anonymous accounts called her opportunistic, questioned her qualifications, and some even threatened violence. One particularly disturbing message suggested she had orchestrated the soda incident for attention. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the backlash. The door opened, and Alan entered with 2 cups of coffee. "You shouldn't read those," he said, sliding 1 cup toward her. "I need to know what we're up against," Amara replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Maya knocked and entered, carrying a folder of positive emails from employees whose careers had blossomed under the new initiatives. "For every troll online, there are 10 people in this building whose lives are changing," she said, placing the folder before Amara. The 3 sat together, reviewing the testimonials. Jerome Williams, the head of security, joined them later with updates on the improved safety protocols and reports of decreased tensions throughout the building. "They want you to quit," Jerome said bluntly, referring to the online harassers. "They're betting you'll decide it's not worth the fight." Amara straightened her shoulders and reached for her device. With a decisive tap, she closed the browser with all the hateful comments. "No, they don't know who they're dealing with," she said, a small smile forming at the corners of her mouth. "This is just the beginning." 2 months after the infamous soda incident, Teknova's fortunes began to shift dramatically. The company secured a landmark contract with Eco Future, a client known for its stringent ethical standards. During the final negotiations, EcoFuture's representatives specifically mentioned Technova's recent diversity initiatives as a deciding factor. The reforms you've implemented aren't just morally right, they're good business, said the EcoFuture CEO during the signing ceremony as Alan Johnson beamed with pride. The seven-figure deal represented more than just financial recovery. It was validation of the painful transformation the company had undergone. Quarterly reports showed profits rebounding faster than projected. The initial dip in productivity had given way to innovation as new voices found space to contribute. Competitors who had initially mocked Technova's PR crisis now scrambled to implement similar reforms, sensing a shift in the industry landscape. Maya Ramirez noticed the change first in small ways: more eye contact in meetings, fewer interruptions when she spoke. Then came the formal email from Human Resources requesting her presence in the executive suite. She entered nervously, clutching her tablet to her chest. "Your actions that day didn't just help Amara Johnson," Alan explained, gesturing for her to take a seat. "You showed exactly the kind of integrity and quick thinking we need more of at Technova." The receptionist, who had once been overlooked, now found herself with a new title: Executive Relations Coordinator. Her salary doubled overnight, and she moved from the front desk to an office with a view of the Chicago skyline. The promotion came with responsibilities that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "I'm just a receptionist," Maya had whispered when Alan first offered the position. "You were never just anything," he replied firmly. Her first task was helping implement the SafeSpeak system Amara had designed. Maya's understanding of company dynamics proved invaluable as she identified blind spots in the reporting process that more senior executives had missed. Throughout the building, other employees took note. Jerome Williams approached Maya for advice on security protocols. Lisa Carter invited her to speak at department meetings. The woman who had once been invisible was now sought after for her perspective. At home, Maya placed her new business cards on her kitchen table, running her fingers over the embossed letters of her title. She remembered how her hand had trembled when she'd called Alan's office that fateful day. The same courage that had made her break protocol was now reshaping her future and Technova's. 3 months after the soda incident, Technova's boardroom buzzed with tension. Amara Johnson stood at the head of the table, the external auditor's report spread before her like a battlefield map. The findings were both encouraging and sobering. Discrimination complaints had plummeted by 60%. But the report highlighted persistent blind spots in middle management and troubling patterns in promotion decisions. "This isn't a victory lap," Amara said, her voice steady as she addressed the executives. "This is a progress report, and we have miles to go." She tapped the document with a manicured finger, drawing attention to the recommendations highlighted in red. Alan Johnson watched his wife with a mixture of pride and concern. As CEO, he understood the financial pressures the board faced, but he also recognized the moral imperative behind Amara's push for continued reform. "The numbers don't lie," he added, backing her position. "We've made progress, but complacency now would undo everything." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. One executive suggested they might ease up on the aggressive timeline for implementing the remaining changes, citing budget concerns. Amara's response was immediate. "The cost of backsliding would be far greater than the cost of moving forward," she countered, presenting data on improved employee retention and the positive press that had boosted Technova's stock value in recent weeks. Meanwhile, across the building, Lisa Carter was leading her first workshop as Technova's newly appointed diversity officer. At 29, she was the youngest person to hold such a position in the company's history. The conference room, was packed with employees from various departments, many still hesitant to speak openly. What happened in our lobby wasn't an isolated incident, Lisa explained, her confidence a stark contrast to the junior analyst who had nervously recorded the confrontation months earlier. It was a symptom of a culture we're all responsible for changing. She introduced a forum format where employees could anonymously submit experiences of discrimination, which would then be discussed as case studies. The stories poured in, from microaggressions to blatant harassment, creating a tapestry of pain that had remained hidden beneath Technova's polished surface. Maya Ramirez, now in her role as Executive Relations Coordinator, helped facilitate these sessions, her promotion a visible symbol of the company's evolving values. When I called the CEO's office that day, she shared, I was terrified. Now I want everyone to feel empowered to speak up without that fear. By week's end, Lisa had compiled the workshop findings into a comprehensive report that would inform the next phase of reforms. She delivered it personally to Amara, who recognized in the younger woman's determination a reflection of her own unwavering resolve. We're not just changing policies, Amara told her. We're changing hearts and minds. That's always the harder battle. 5 months after the incident that had shaken Technova to its core, Amara Johnson found herself in high demand. Her phone buzzed constantly with requests from Fortune 500 companies seeking her guidance on transforming their corporate cultures. What had begun as a personal humiliation had evolved into a movement that transcended industry boundaries. I never expected to become the face of corporate reform, Amara confided to her husband over dinner in their Chicago apartment. Alan squeezed her hand supportively, pride evident in his eyes. They're not calling because of what happened to you, he replied. They're calling because of what you did after. Amara's calendar filled with speaking engagements across the country. In New York, she addressed a room of executives from the financial sector. In San Francisco, tech leaders hung on her every word. Her message remained consistent. True change required more than diversity statements and token hires. It demanded accountability at every level. At Technova headquarters, the transformation continued. Jerome Williams had emerged as an unexpected champion of the new approach. The head of security, once known primarily for his efficiency, had developed a comprehensive training program that redefined how staff interacted with visitors and each other. Security isn't just about protecting assets, Jerome explained to a group of new hires in the redesigned lobby. It's about ensuring everyone who walks through these doors feels safe and respected. His program, Dignity in Practice, quickly gained attention beyond Technova. Security teams from 23 companies had already adopted his protocols, with another dozen scheduled for training in the coming weeks. Maya Ramirez, now firmly established in her role as Executive Relations Coordinator, collaborated closely with Jerome to integrate the security protocols with her visitor experience initiatives. Remember when this place felt like a fortress? She asked Lisa Carter as they passed through the lobby one morning. The young diversity officer smiled. Now it feels like somewhere people actually want to be. The metrics supported their observations. Employee retention had increased by 22%. Applications from diverse candidates had tripled. Even the most skeptical board members couldn't argue with the improved atmosphere and productivity. One afternoon, Amara received an email from Robert Davis, the executive who had stood frozen during her humiliation. I've been thinking about my silence that day, he wrote. I'm sorry I didn't speak up. Your courage has taught me what leadership truly means. As Amara prepared for her keynote at the Midwest Business Forum, she reflected on the ripple effects of that terrible moment 5 months ago. The old corporate culture, built on fear, silence, and exclusion, was crumbling across industries. In its place, something stronger and more authentic was taking root. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was irreversible. And that, Amara thought as she reviewed her notes, was worth every difficult step of the journey. The 5th month of Technova's transformation brought unexpected turbulence. 3 senior executives handed in their resignations within a single week, citing philosophical differences with the new direction. These weren't just any employees. They were top performers whose sales numbers had consistently exceeded targets for years. "We're hemorrhaging talent," warned Thomas Blackwell, the CFO, during an emergency board meeting. Quarterly reports showed a 15% dip in productivity as teams adjusted to new protocols and training requirements. The boardroom, once a sanctuary of consensus, now crackled with tension as several members questioned whether Amara Johnson's reforms had gone too far, too fast. Alan stood at the head of the table, tie loosened but resolve unshaken. "The people leaving are precisely those who cannot function in an environment where respect is non-negotiable," he stated firmly. His gaze swept across the anxious faces. "If our success was built on intimidation and exclusion, then it wasn't sustainable to begin with." Amara joined him later that afternoon, armed with data from companies that had weathered similar transitions. The couple worked late into the night, reviewing projections and preparing counter-arguments. Their partnership had deepened through crisis, professional admiration blending with personal devotion as they fought for the company's soul. "On short-term losses for long-term integrity," Amara reminded him as they shared a late dinner in his office. "The numbers will recover. Our humanity shouldn't be negotiable." Meanwhile, Jerome Williams reported that complaints through the SafeSpeak system had decreased by 40%. "People aren't just reporting problems, they're solving them before they escalate," the head of security explained, his satisfaction evident. The new protocols were working. Outside Technova's walls, the media narrative had shifted dramatically. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature titled "The Technova Turnaround: How Crisis Became Opportunity." Business magazines that had initially predicted the company's downfall now requested interviews with Amara. Her methodical approach to institutional change became case studies in management courses. Maya Ramirez, now comfortable in her role as Executive Relations Coordinator, managed a growing list of speaking requests for both Alan and his wife. "The Harvard Business School wants you both for their leadership summit," she informed them with pride. Not everyone celebrated this evolution. Anonymous online forums still buzzed with criticism and resistance, yet within Technova, a new energy was taking hold. Employees who had once kept their heads down now spoke up in meetings. Teams that had operated in silos began collaborating across departments. The board's anxiety gradually gave way to cautious optimism as client retention rates held steady despite the internal upheaval. Amara's vision of a workplace built on dignity rather than fear was slowly becoming reality. 6 months to the day after the soda incident, Amara Johnson stood on the stage at the National Diversity Summit, her voice steady as she addressed the packed auditorium. The spotlight caught the subtle highlights in her hair as she gripped the podium. Scanning the sea of attentive faces, "What happened to me wasn't just about one can of soda or one man's actions," she said, her words resonating through the hall. "It was about systems that allow such behavior to fester unchecked, about the silence that becomes complicity." The audience leaned forward as Amara shared Technova's transformation journey. She spoke not of vengeance but of accountability, how companies could rebuild trust by acknowledging harm rather than hiding it. Her presentation included data from their anonymous reporting system, showing how SafeSpeak had uncovered issues that might have remained buried for years. "The hardest part wasn't firing those responsible," Amara explained, referencing Brad's dismissal without naming him directly. It was confronting the rot beneath the surface, the policies that protected some while silencing others, the unwritten rules about who belongs and who doesn't. She acknowledged the cost of change, the temporary productivity dips, the resignations of those unwilling to adapt, the initial skepticism from investors. But then she revealed Technova's latest quarterly results, showing how diversity had driven innovation and attracted new clients. True transformation isn't a PR exercise, she continued, her voice gaining strength. It requires courage to look unflinchingly at uncomfortable truths. It demands we value dignity over dollars, even when it hurts the bottom line. In the front row, Alan watched his wife with undisguised admiration. He remembered how she'd stood in the lobby that day, dripping with soda, but unbroken in spirit. Now she was redefining corporate America's approach to inclusion, one company at a time. As Amara concluded, she invited Jerome Williams to join her briefly. The head of security described how security protocols now emphasize dignity alongside safety, his training program becoming a model for firms nationwide. When Amara finished speaking, the silence lasted only a moment before the crowd rose as one. The applause thundered through the hall, people standing on chairs to see her better. Some wiped away tears, while others nodded in fierce agreement. Alan's eyes glistened with pride and gratitude as he joined the standing ovation. He knew that Amara's quiet power, her refusal to be silenced, her insistence on systemic change, had transformed not just their company, but was reshaping an entire industry's understanding of justice and belonging. 6 months had transformed Technova's Chicago headquarters beyond recognition. The lobby, once the stage for Amara Johnson's humiliation, now stood as a testament to inclusion and achievement. Where cold marble and sterile corporate aesthetics had once dominated, vibrant portraits of diverse leaders from various backgrounds now adorned the walls, their eyes seeming to watch over the space with protective vigilance. Maya Ramirez adjusted her Executive Relations Coordinator badge as she crossed the lobby, still occasionally surprised by her own reflection in the polished surfaces. The receptionist desk, where she had once trembled while making that fateful call to Alan Johnson's office, was now staffed by a team of 3. Trained specifically in dignified visitor protocols, developed by Jerome Williams' security team. "Still can't believe how different it feels in here," Lisa Carter said, falling into step beside Maya. The young diversity officer carried a tablet displaying the latest SafeSpeak statistics. Reports down 30% this month, a sign that preventative measures were working. "Remember how quiet it used to get whenever certain managers walked through?" Maya replied. Her voice no longer hushed by fear. Now people actually talked to each other. The 2 women navigated through the bustling space where employees of all backgrounds conversed freely. A group of new hires received orientation near the East Wall, where a timeline chronicled Technova's transformation journey, complete with news clippings, policy changes, and testimonials. "Alan just approved the mentorship program budget," Lisa said, excitement brightening her face. "Double what we asked for," Maya smiled, remembering how the CEO had changed too, from a man blindsided by his company's toxic culture to a fierce advocate for the reforms his wife had championed. "He told me yesterday that applications for open positions have tripled since the reforms." Their laughter echoed across the lobby as they shared a joke about Robert Davis, who had finally found his voice after months of fence-sitting. The mid-level executive now led ally training sessions. His earlier moment of paralysis transformed into a teaching tool. Near the entrance, a small plaque commemorated the incident that had sparked everything, not to memorialize pain, but to ensure the company never forgot its commitment. Beneath it, fresh flowers were replaced daily. As they reached the elevators, Maya and Lisa paused to greet a potential client touring the facility. The visitor remarked on the palpable energy in the building. "It wasn't always like this," Maya said with quiet pride. "But now we're finally seen." Their voices, once silenced by fear, now filled the space with purpose, a harmony of triumph over silence, of hope over fear. Amara Johnson paused beneath the gleaming Technova logo, her reflection rippling across the polished marble floor where everything had changed 6 months ago. She ran her fingers along the smooth wall, feeling the company's pulse beneath her touch. Stronger now, more vibrant than before. The headquarters bustled with a different energy, one that felt authentic and alive. She closed her eyes briefly, the memories still vivid, the cold splash of soda streaming down her face, the sticky sweetness matting her hair, Brad Morgan's smirk dissolving as she reached for her phone instead of cowering. The stunned silence of employees who had never expected to witness such naked prejudice in their modern workplace. Thinking about that day, Maya approached, her new executive badge catching the light. The former receptionist now walked with the confidence of someone who knew her worth. "Every day," Amara admitted, "but differently now." The two women watched as a diverse group of new hires toured the lobby, led by Lisa Carter. The young diversity officer pointed to the wall of recognition where employee initiatives were celebrated, a far cry from the sterile corporate displays that once dominated the space. "Alan called," Maya said, checking her device. "The board unanimously approved the expansion of SafeSpeak to all regional offices." Amara nodded, satisfaction warming her chest. What had begun as one man's cruelty had catalyzed transformation across an entire corporation. The anonymous reporting system had become Technova's most valuable tool for preventing harassment and discrimination before they took root. Jerome Williams waved from security, where he was training new staff on respectful engagement protocols. The head of security had become one of their strongest allies, proving that protection and dignity could coexist. Amara's phone buzzed, another company requesting consultation on implementing similar reforms. Her calendar was filled with such requests now, each one an opportunity to extend the ripples of change beyond these walls. She remembered Robert Davis approaching her last week, his eyes downcast as he apologized for his silence that day. "I was afraid," he'd admitted. "But you taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it." Outside, Chicago's skyline stretched toward clouds heavy with spring rain. Somewhere in that city, Brad Morgan was likely still bitter, still blaming her for his downfall, but his name had faded from conversation while hers had become synonymous with courage. Amara smiled, touching the wedding band that connected her to Alan, her partner in life and now in this unexpected mission. What she felt wasn't the sharp thrill of revenge, but something deeper and more sustaining, the quiet certainty that when one voice refuses to be silenced, it can indeed rewrite the story for everyone.